Tonight I have a guest named Chris Roman, and he's one of my good friends, and he's a Buddhist and a therapist. And I've invited him, blah, blah. I've invited him here tonight to talk about a little bit of what wisdom he has on life and philosophy and psychology. So, Chris, say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
And he is the most fascinating person that I know about thoughts and wisdom, a whole lot of wisdom. So one of the things that I think is important is the Buddhism. There's a certain type of Buddhism. Well, apparently there's a lot of Buddhism. I'm a little layperson here, but could you explain your Buddhism and how it differentiates?
Well, a lot of people think that Buddhism is a religion, that we worship the fat guy. And that's the first notion I want to dispel, is it really has nothing to do about worshiping, Shakyamuni was his name, the Indian Buddha 3,000 years ago. In reality, I believe that there were many Buddhas, and included in that, I include Jesus as a Buddha for the Western world. Buddha just means teacher. It doesn't mean deity. It doesn't mean Messiah. It doesn't mean anything divine. It just means somebody who has really come to understand and explain life in the universe to people in their own language and in terms of their own culture. So I look at Buddhism much more as a philosophy. And being a psychotherapist, I also think it's one of the most psychological of religions. And the reason we call it a religion is because when you practice Buddhism, and there are many different kinds of practice, just like there are many different kinds of practice in Christianity, but that practice itself, whether it be meditation or chanting or doing good works or whatever it may be, that in a way is an act of faith. But it's a faith in God as the universe itself, as opposed to something separate from us. It's a faith that the universe itself is of one consciousness, and we're all a part of that consciousness. So just like in Christianity, God is like the Father and we're like the children, Buddhism says, yeah, but we as the children can grow up and become like the Father. And so the important teaching of Buddhism is, how do we progress? How do we change our destiny? In Buddhism, it's called karma, which is probably a word a lot of you know. But how do we change that to create a happier life? Sometimes people think that Buddha taught that life is suffering, and he didn't. What Buddha taught was that life includes suffering for all of us. We all suffer, whether it's birth or aging or illness and ultimately death. There's always suffering involved in life, and we're seeing a lot of that right now, which is freaking a lot of people out. But his point was, if you can move in a positive direction, if you can make causes, if you can make acts of love towards one another, then you can create a happier life for yourself. So Buddhism is really about just kind of becoming happy in this life and not worrying quite so much about what's happening when the bad things do happen. And right now, there's a lot of bad things happening, and we're all feeling that. And I'm certainly experiencing an increase in my business as a result of it. But that's really what Buddhism is, to my mind.
Are you trying to say, a part of what are you trying to say is that in Buddhism you take responsibility for your behavior, your thoughts, and your actions?
Absolutely. Buddhism is really about accountability. Buddhism would say that if you want to understand why your life is the way it is right now, look at your past life and look at what you've done, both good and bad. And if you want your future to be better, then look at the ways you can change what you're doing right now to the best of your ability. But now is all that counts. Now, the moment right now is what's important. Not the history, and not, which has already happened, and really not the future, which is kind of a mystery.
So is all Buddhism the same? When someone says, I'm a Buddhist, Is that just one religion?
No. The only way Buddhism is the same, well, I don't even want to say it's that. I was going to say we don't believe in something outside of ourselves, but the earlier forms of Buddhism, remember, this is being taught 1,000 years before Christianity. The Buddha knew he was dealing with fairly primitive people. So in his first few years of teaching, he taught things like commandments, how you should behave, how you should be.
No adultery, no stealing,
Yeah,
no
well,
lying.
along those lines, commandments are in all kinds of religions, and people naturally, because they didn't really understand where he was coming from, started to worship him. Started to think that it's all about worshiping the Buddha. But in his last 8 years of teaching, which is what I practice, it's something called the Lotus Sutra. He said, "Forget everything I've said before. The power lies within you, and it's always lied within you. It's not about somebody coming to your rescue."
So, how old were you when you became a Buddhist?
I was 20.
And how long ago was that?
That was 52 years.
And you stuck with it.
Yep, I haven't missed meditation for 52 years.
Can you tell me what first got you excited about Buddhism? I don't want to say excited, maybe curious or intrigued.
Well, I'm kind of an old hippie, and what actually got me intrigued about Buddhism, I grew up, and I was more or less an atheist or agnostic. I wasn't interested. I was born Jewish, and I wasn't interested in praying to or following a God who sent the angel of death over non-Jewish people's homes to kill their children. That's what Passover is about. And I wasn't very thrilled about the Jewish religion. I have no problem with it, and I actually consider myself ethnically Jewish. But there's parts of the Jewish religion that I personally didn't like. I'm not trying to put it down if there's any Jewish people out there, but I didn't like the notion that it was, first of all, that we were taught that we were the chosen people, because I don't think anybody's chosen, And I didn't like this vindictive, angry God of the Old Testament.
So there's a Old Testament, and then there's a New Testament.
Then there's a New Testament, which I like much better, especially the Beatitudes or Corinthians. But what really taught me and got me pursuing Buddhism, frankly, because I am an old hippie, was I had a really bad LSD trip when I was about 19 years old. And at the end of that trip, where I actually tried to kill myself on 2 different occasions, as I was coming down, I got this overriding sense, which I remember very clearly to this day, that everything is one. It's kind of, I was hallucinating because I was on a drug, but everything felt like, I don't know, some of you may have seen the movie The Matrix. It was like that, except the Matrix was not mechanical. It wasn't technological. It was organic. I just got this sense that the universe is one. People are one with each other, and they're one with the planet, and they're even one with their animals.
So 50 years later, you still believe that?
Absolutely.
Is that the meaning of, what's the meaning of namaste?
Namaste?
Yes.
I wish I could remember. There's a whole quote. Yeah, people hear namaste all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. What it means is, I salute the divinity within you. And where you are in that place of love and peace and beauty within yourself, and I am there as well, then we are one. So there's much more to it. It's not just hello, goodbye.
So how do you infuse your philosophy into your therapy, and how do you see that transforming people?
The main way I use it in my philosophy or my psychology,
yes,
is to explain to people that they are accountable, for what's happening to them to some degree, and that they can change if they are willing to make the changes that essentially involve them changing their attitudes toward other people and the way they express their love to other people. One thing I do a lot of is teaching people about something called nonviolent communication, which is a kind of communication that instead of saying to another person, I don't like you, or you did this, or you said that, or I think your attitude was that, instead you talk about what you're feeling. I feel this way when you do that, or I feel this way and I'm not sure why. Because when you talk about what you're feeling, you're talking about how you feel now. When you talk about what the other person did, you're talking about the past and it's already been done. So it's more important to talk about how you're feeling, and then hopefully the other person will join you in talking about how they're feeling. And then what you'll come to find out, almost invariably, is that you're feeling two different ways because you're two different people with two different histories, and most importantly, two different sets of values, which is the problem that we're having today because people have such differing sets of values that we've been polarized, that we've been made to feel like we're opposite from other people or different from other people. So we're not talking enough about our feelings. We're talking too much about what somebody else did.
Continue to do, maybe.
And continue to do. But nonviolent communication is meant to develop a kind of communication where you can reach an agreement to at least discuss what your values are and then see if you can accommodate each other's values.
In the last 50 years, there's been a lot of change. What significant? Yeah, not enough. What significant changes have you seen in the 50 years?
Well, for me, because I'm older, the most significant change in my life was the day John F. Kennedy was shot. That destroyed me. And then it was only a few years later that Martin Luther King was shot. And I had actually seen and met Martin Luther King. And then about a year after that, Robert F. Kennedy was shot. And then we ended up with a crook named Nixon becoming president. So with regard to our society, those were the fundamental changes. There are continuing changes today, but that's what really kind of...
With those deaths, what do you think the America lost?
Fortune. I think America lost some of its fortune because we have adopted a myth of exceptionality. And the only way we are exceptional is that we are a melting pot of all kinds of different people. But we're also exceptional in the fact that we built our country on the genocide of Native Americans and on the slavery of Black people. So we're not that great. We're a great country and we have great potential. But we've gotten a little bit arrogant about the imagined history that we have, and we've ignored a little bit too much about some of the bad things that have happened.
So for those people who would need some positive feedback and affirmations tonight, what kind of advice would you give them, those seeking answers?
I would say that right now is a time of tremendous uncertainty about the future. The only time I've seen people with such uncertainty is when I once ran a cancer support group at a hospital nearby here. And I told them when I went to do that job that I've never had cancer, what can I do? And they just said, listen. So I did. And it was really amazing to me how in this group of about 20 people, there was such uncertainty. They didn't know if their cancer was cured. They didn't know if it was coming back. They didn't know if they were going to lose a part of their body. They didn't know if they were going to die. And they had to live with that uncertainty day after day after day. And the people that I found were most successful in living with that uncertainty were people who had faith in something, and also people who had a good support group, people they could love, whether it was their family or their friends or whatever. And the people who were most alone were the people who kind of stayed to themselves and got very rigid in their beliefs and their thoughts and didn't really connect enough with other people. So as horrible as our situation is today, particularly the COVID, I think it's a great opportunity for people, because we're stuck at home anyway, to kind of get to know each other and learn how to love each other better. And if they can't, then hopefully learn how to communicate in a nonviolent way. Now, even as I say that, I'm a realist. The fact is that domestic abuse has skyrocketed because people who are living together and don't really like each other that much are abusing each other even more. But I don't think that's the lesson to be learned by all of this. I think the lesson to be learned from all of this is all we really have is ourselves and the people that we care about and the people that we love. It doesn't matter if we have a mansion. It doesn't matter if we have a Lexus. It doesn't matter if we've got a whole lot of money in the bank. one of the reasons I call myself a liberation psychologist is that there was a Jesuit monk in Guatemala who actually coined the term liberation psychology about 20 years ago. He was a Jesuit monk, and what he said is, instead of looking at people and saying they're mentally ill, why don't we look at our society and realize that we really haven't created the ideal society for people to be mentally healthy, in terms of the inequity, in terms of the great division between rich and poor, in terms of the great division between races and ethnicity and religion. So he said, what we have to do is fix society, not fix people. Now, for his efforts, he was assassinated by the Guatemalan government. His name was Ignacio Martin Barros. But I really liked that take on things because he wasn't saying it's people's fault. He was saying that somehow the rich and the powerful have created this society that we're all supposed to accommodate or adjust to, when in reality there's so many more things we could be doing as human beings to improve society and improve the well-being of each other.
So, that was an awful lot. So, in your therapy practice, when you're doing the therapy, which you're doing an awful lot, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that I still believe that people are essentially good, even though there are a lot of people today who believe that people are not essentially good. One thing Buddhism says is that we're all Buddhas and we should dignify each other. That's what Namaste says. Namaste says, I respect and appreciate the divinity within you. And when you're there and when I'm there, then we are one. And I believe that. I believe that human beings evolved. I think the big mistake we make as human beings is we're not done evolving yet. There's more to go. I don't know if it's science fiction that we're all going to get really big heads and really little bodies or something like that. But we're nowhere near as evolved as ultimately we're going to be, assuming that we survive the things that we've actually created, things like climate change, things like viruses and stuff like that.
When you're doing your therapy, what is your goal? If you have a goal.
My goal is to teach people how to make as many good causes as they can in their communication, in their love for one another, in their respect for one another. I always challenge people who speak disrespectfully of others. The main thing that happens in my therapy is if somebody starts calling names to somebody else, which happens a lot because I counsel a lot of couples, I immediately challenge them and say there has got to be a better way of communicating than just calling somebody a name. Unfortunately, when I talked about evolution before, our technology has evolved beyond our human capabilities. In the old days, I'm talking about the old days because I'm old, we would react to things in minutes or seconds. But computers and social media and video games have caused us to have to react really quickly. And when we do that, a lot of times we react really emotionally to what's happening. Instead of using our reasonable mind, we react on the basis of pure emotion and some mistaken beliefs that we acquired during our life. So the real challenge, I believe, is getting away a little bit from the technology that we think ties us together and get more into real life communication with other people. That's why I don't text, because text doesn't have a tone of voice. Text doesn't have an innuendo to it. You've got to actually talk to one another and preferably, even in person, be with one another to understand where the other person is really coming from. And texting does not allow for that.
What do you see? I won't ask you what do you see. What do you hope will happen for the future?
I hope people will use advantage of this time to see how things need to change, to reorganize our priorities. We were not born to work 8 hours a day. We were not born to accumulate, if we're lucky, 1 week's worth of PTO. We were not born to make other people money. I think this is a time of creativity. And one good thing about the internet is a lot of people are actually making some good money and doing some really creative things like you and like this radio station using the internet. I think this is a really positive use of the technology. But, things like Facebook, which refuses to check the truth of anything anybody says, and just the incivility that has happened on the internet. Remember, the number one thing still on the internet for everybody is pornography. And that is not a particularly positive thing. So if we can use the internet to become more creative and more caring about one another, then I think it can be positive. But we have to get the technology under control, and it's not quite there yet.
So, where can people reach you if they want to get a hold of you?
Probably through you. I don't have a website. I work. If people want therapy with me, they can go to BetterHelp, because that's where I do therapy on BetterHelp. I do it on video.
Is it BetterHelp.com?
It is BetterHelp.com.
And you're also on Psychology Today.
I'm on Psychology Today, and I also have a website on BetterHelp.com. You can go to the website and see more about me.
CrisRoman.
Yep.
Chris Roman. Is there a little bit of hippie left in you?
There's a lot of hippie left in me.
All right.
You know that.
Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching us and learning more about Chris. And hopefully you'll come back and visit and be on air again. We appreciate that.
Okay. Well, I will certainly try if I didn't wreck your ratings.
Oh, and you can reach me, and Chris has a page as a sponsor, www.psychicpaths.com. I will be back next week with readings again, and I'm excited to do those readings for you and be of help. So have a good night, and bye.